Hello and welcome to this video on moral realism. And so what we're going to do as we continue our brief overview of ethical systems is look at how we can kind of categorize different aspects of kind of moral thinking, ethical systems, and the way we think about ethics and morality. And so we'll start this within this video on moral realism, and we will follow up in another video on moral skepticism. So at the very basic sense, moral realism is a philosophy that basically looks at the fact that moral facts are going to exist. So moral facts and moralities and ethical actions are going to be present within the universe. They're going to be a part of the fabric of the universe, and they exist independent of our thoughts about them. And so morality and ethics isn't something that man is creating. Morality and ethics is something that is going to be inherent and present within the universe. So as we are starting to understand the concept of moral realism, we need to study the three kind of essential elements that are going to be present within moral realism. And so there's going to be a cognitive component, an objective component, as well as a metaphysical component. So the first element within moral realism is the concept of objectivist, so an objectivist element. And this is an idea that moral principles have an objective validity. And so remember, objective is going to be independent of a person's views, independent of a society or a cultural view. And so the goal is that with a moral realism, with this objectivist element, is that it has objective validity. It doesn't need to be looked at in terms of relativism. It doesn't need to have some type of social or cultural approval for what is considered morality and what is considered an ethical action. So the second element of moral realism is the cognitivist element. And this is based on the idea, again, that the moral principles, as we described in the previous slide, are objectivist. So these moral principles are going to involve assertions that can be evaluated as either true or false. And so we can look at a situation, look at an action, and through the process of thinking about it, now that's the cognitive component, the process of thinking about that situation and what you should be doing and how you should be acting, you should be able to determine whether that action is going to be right or whether that action is going to be wrong. And the final component of moral realism is this metaphysical element. And so as we've described moral realism so far, we've got this idea that moral facts exist in reality. They're present within the universe, but we're not quite sure where they are. We're not quite sure what they are. And so the metaphysical element is this idea that these moral facts, this idea of morality, is that it is basically present in the universe and it's beyond what we can kind of observe individually using our individual senses, using our immediate senses. And so this metaphysical element then basically says that we can determine whether or not an action is going to be moral and ethical by applying logic to this. And so we're going to have to think about that cognitivist element. We're going to have to think about that as opposed to simply kind of using our senses to perceive it or using our senses to observe these moral facts. And so they're there, but we can't sense them. They're present, but we need to be able to use them by applying logic to them. So building upon this definition about what moral realism is, we can see that there are going to be three categories of moral realists. The first category are going to be the theistic moral realist. The second category are going to be the naturalistic moral realists. And then the third and final category are going to be the non-naturalistic moral realists. So the first category of moral realists are going to be the theistic moral realists. And so for the theistic moral realists, they're going to be seeing moral values as being real, as existing in the universe, as being something kind of beyond our individual perception, but that these moral values exist within the presence of a God. And so therefore, for the theistic moral realists, the act of morality and appropriate ethical behaviors is going to be dependent upon a God's will or a God's reason. And so again, looking at this in the realm of moral realists, therefore God's will becomes an objective fact present within the universe. And we've already seen this in another video where we've taken a look at religion and ethics and the divine command theory as being a prime example of a theistic, moral, realistic ethical philosophy. So the second category of moral realists are going to be the naturalistic moral realists. Again, using the same definitions for moral reality, or moral realism, as we've described it before. Moral values and appropriate ethical behaviors are going to exist within the universe, but we're not looking at a theistic moral realist. We're looking at a naturalistic moral realist. And so they're going to see that these moral values are going to exist within the natural world. And so they're connected to specific properties within that natural world, such as pleasure and satisfaction, that again we've talked about in a separate video already. And therefore, similar to the way that theistic moral realists saw that God's will is going to be the basis of moral facts, in this case, the naturalistic moral realists are going to be looking at this view, the properties of pleasure and satisfaction are going to be present within the world, present within the universe, and they become objective facts. And so examples of ethical systems that fall into the category of naturalistic moral realist will include things like egoism, utilitarianism, as well as virtue theory. Now, the third and final category of moral realists are the non-naturalistic moral realists. And for the non-naturalistic moral realist, we're getting closer to kind of an abstract view of morality. And so they view that moral values exist, but they're not based on a God. They're not based on kind of natural properties that are found within the world. They're going to be grounded on non-natural facts about the world. And so this is where that abstractics come in. They're there, but we can't perceive them. We can't observe them. They can't be detected or observed using our normal skills. They're not going to be detected or observed using our senses. They're not going to be detected or observed using scientific method and kind of experimenting and trying to determine what they are. So they're there, but we're really not quite sure what they are. They're present, but they're kind of hard to describe. Now, in an effort to try to describe what it is that is going to be non-naturalism and what are these moral realistic facts present within this non-naturalistic world, a good example, a good way of thinking about this is in Plato's Allegory of the Cave. And so in the Allegory of the Cave, Plato basically views the universe as having two realms. There's going to be an upper realm, and in that upper realm, there are going to be perfect ideal forms. There's basically going to be kind of reality present within this upper realm. But what we're able to perceive, what humans are able to perceive, are going to be the things that are coming from that lower realm. And so the lower realm is basically kind of not seeing the direct, perfect, ideal forms. What we're seeing is kind of an illusion. You can think about it almost as like shadow puppets. And so you've got kind of that perfect reality over here, but we're not able to see that perfect reality because it's behind a wall or in Plato's universe and in that upper realm. So we're not seeing what's going on there. What we're seeing is going to be this illusion. We're going to see almost like shadow puppets that are going to be projected on a wall. And because that's an illusion, it's not reality, it's subject to error. And because of that, our interpretation of what's going on with these ideal perfect forms is going to be ever changing based on our understanding of the world, based on our looking at these observations of the illusion about what is going on. So we've got a basic understanding of moral realism, but what we're going to see is that, like all of the other ethical systems, and you get philosophers talking about the advantages and disadvantages of each of these systems, there are going to be challenges that can be present within this. And so for a moral realist, they're basically operating on the assumption that two statements are going to be true. The first of the statement is that there are going to be moral claims that exist, moral claims that can be viewed as being factual. So that's the first component. The second component is that these moral facts, these moral claims, some of them actually are going to be true. And so answering yes to both of these categories. Now, the challenges to moral realism are going to come in the view of either non-cognitivists or error theorists. So for a non-cognitivist, they're basically going to say no. Moral claims are not factual, and therefore, if they're not factual, there's no way in which they can be true. And so a non-cognitivist is going to answer no to both of these questions, where an error theorist is going to say, yes, some moral claims are going to be factual, but they may not necessarily be true. And so we're going to look at each one of these challenges in a little bit more detail. So for a non-cognitivist, they're basically saying that these moral claims are not facts. And because they're not facts, they can't be determined to be true in some way. And so for a non-cognitivist, they're basically going to say that these moral claims aren't based in nature, and they're not based on, a god or a deity. Basically, they represent emotions. They represent an effort to kind of control behavior, society determining what is the appropriate way to act in a given situation, or they may be kind of representing an action to take a stand either for or against something. And therefore, for a non-cognitivist, moral claims are not facts, they're really subjective. They're going to be subjective to an individual's view, whether that's an individual as a person or an individual culture or society. And by being subjective, they're not going to be applying to everybody in all situations. So falling into that almost relativistic view where they are going to be based on differing emotions, differing attitudes, differing interests. And therefore, what is viewed as moral to a non-cognitivist will change based on the individuals that are looking at that situation. So for the error theorists, they are a little bit similar to the moral realists. They view that moral claims are going to be facts, and so they exist. But for an error theorist, they're basically saying, going into that metaphysical realm, you cannot find evidence to prove the fact as being a true or a false claim. And so, yeah, it may exist, but we don't know if it's accurate. We don't know if it's what should be followed. And therefore, because we can't determine if it's right or wrong, it kind of raises the question, if we don't know if it's right or wrong, how can we be following that? How can we be using that as a guide for our behavior? Hey, so thank you for listening to this video on moral realism. Following up with a second video on moral skepticism to contrast with the view of moral realists. So hopefully you take a look at that video. Thank you and have a great day.